having Wild come out and all that, the blizzard around it.
It's really, truly, I think, the most surreal experience of my life. It's one thing to have your book made into a movie, which I think is, itself a pretty extraordinary experience. But that book is about a real experience, that I lived through. It's about me. Reese Witherspoon is me on the screen. And I've had, so many different emotions about the experience. It's delightful. It's glorious. It's exciting. It's also scary. When I wrote the book, as you know, you're a writer, you put yourself in a really vulnerable place when you write true stories about yourself. And in Wild, I went to all of those places. I really tried very hard to be as candid and transparent as possible. But, I was in control of every word. Every sentence in that book was a decision that I made.
Right.
And so the movie, it's in somebody else's hands.
Right.
And so to have it received in the world is a whole different experience, because now thousands of people have seen it, and many of them have written to me. They talk to me about things that I've lived through. They mention my mother by name, but they also tell me their own stories. They say very commonly, "You don't know it, Cheryl, but we're best friends.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's my life. You've written my life." And when I first started getting those letters, at the beginning when Wild came out, I thought, well, that's uncanny that, we have so much in common. I have so much in common with this person or that person. Mm-hmm. And then what I learned is we actually all have more in common than we thought. We just conceal it.
Right.
We don't bring it into the public space. And that's what writers and artists do.
That's right. Human beings are constantly telling two different stories. Every human being is telling two different stories at the same time. The story of who they want the world to think they are, the public self, and the story of who they know themselves inside truly to be.
That's right. Strangely, this experience where I have been in the public eye more than ever, more than I ever expected, frankly, I've had to learn how to trust my private self. I don't know if that's the right way to put it, but to honor the actual person I am.
It's so tough, though, because I think for a lot of people, we're constantly trying to modulate between those two stories. And frankly, what makes most of good literature is the collision of those two stories. The moment when Humbert realizes that he's not just some grand European romantic, but he's a molester who's, exploited this girl and ruined her life in some way or contributed to that process. That's what makes great literature, is that collision of those two stories. But of course, that's in real life, we can't control it. We can't shape it. We can't turn it into a healing journey.
So that's what we're going to talk about in this episode of Dear Sugar Radio. The difference between the public self and the private self, or sometimes even if it's not necessarily a public self, we're not talking about that in terms of fame necessarily, but rather the projected self.
That's right. What the world expects you to be, what you expect yourself to be, because the world expects it, and who you really are inside.
When you were talking about literature and the collision we've seen in so many characters, oftentimes the main drama of the great literature is when that character decides that the center will no longer hold, that self that they've projected is no longer valid. You see this especially in narratives of women, women who have really, throughout time in so many cultures have been, I guess, more strictly held under sort of cultural expectations of who they should be and how they should behave and who they should love and all of those things. And when they step out of that, that's such a powerful and dramatic moment.
Right.
One of the things I really reminded, when I was talking to Reese Witherspoon about the role and also to Nick Hornby about the screenplay, is I said, obviously, I decided to hike the Pacific Crest Trail at the weakest moment of my life, at the bottom point of my life. But what I encourage both of them to remember is at the weakest moment of my life, I decided to go hike on a wilderness trail for 1,100 miles.
Right.
So I reached into my strength in the midst of my deepest sorrow. There were good decisions made amidst some very terrible decisions. And, I think that that's a really important thing. I mean, it's certainly something I know we both talk about when we talk about giving advice, that hardly anything is all one thing.
Right.
That every person who's ever made positive change in their lives did so probably from the position of being down on one's knees. And that's certainly where I was when I decided to do the thing that set me really on the path to where I am today, sitting here across from you.
Right.
And so I think in some of these letters we're going to talk about today, a lot of those people are in that place. Which brings us really to our next letter from a woman who has a self-identity as one thing and, had an experience in a relationship in which she's forced to question that. It's been challenged. Let me read the letter. Dear Sugar, I'm experiencing the loss of a great love and a major crisis of trust in men. I fell in love with a man when we were both 26. We fell in love quickly, fully, foolishly. I'd never been so sure of any feeling for another person in my life. We planned to get married. It was never a matter of if, but when. From arm's length, I can now see the red flags that were always there. My love would comment on another woman's clothing and ask me, "Why can't you wear a little dress like that?" He flirted openly with other women in front of me. He told me in graphic detail about former partners. He urged me to skip meals, get cosmetic surgeries, and all the while to be more confident. He was fixated on all of my physical flaws. A bump on my leg, a few, quote, extra pounds. I'm 5'5" and about 125 pounds. Once he referred to me as a fixer-upper and laughed. The message I got, either explicitly or implicitly, is that he was doing me a favor, not just by being with me, but by reminding me that as a woman, my value derives from my appearance. Towards the end, he slung more mud than ever before. The words repulsive, unfeminine, lame, and obese were used to describe me. I blocked off all connection. He remains convinced that he was in the right. He never said he was sorry. I, of course, am stunned, and I also still kind of love that deeply wounded fucker. Sugar, are these fucked up thoughts about my weight, my flaws, my sensitivities, my clothes, my makeup, are these in the heads of all the men I meet? Was my love just brash enough to articulate them? Is true respect for women even possible from a man? I thought this guy loved me for my ambition, my values, my humor, my kindness. But he just so clearly didn't. I'm hurt and angry. I look at my own face in the mirror and it's hard not to cry. I spent my young life carving out a sense of identity that didn't revolve around my appearance. For that, I was proud. I can sense it slipping away with this loss. What do you think? Your friend, a wounded feminist.
Wow. There's a part of me anyway, I'm sure you as well, Cheryl, that's just like, thank God. Thank God she's away from this toxic, misogynistic, asshole. I mean, God, love warps the mind. What we consent to, what we put up with, he's making her feel like she's worthless. And it sounds like for a long while, she really consented to it. And the interesting question is, when you have a public sense of yourself and an internal sense of yourself, especially as a feminist, why is it that in the personal realm, we can for so long put up with absolutely cruel, abjectly cruel, denigrating, misogynistic behavior? Does this feel familiar to you at all, Cheryl?
Well, I've avoided men who have been mean to me about my body and my looks. And that's not because I'm, some sort of advanced form of feminist. It's just for whatever reason, men who adore me are my fetish. I have been lucky enough to be attracted to men who have been really respectful to me, about those things. But I want to say the piece that I do deeply relate to, and I want to just reassure wounded feminists about this, is she is so not alone. I mean, I am a feminist. Right. Most of my friends are feminists, and all of us struggle with, the difference between our ideals and our values and the decisions we make in our personal relationships, the things we think about.
Yep.
I think that the least important thing about a person is how they look. And I spend a lot of time and money and brain energy and spirit energy worrying about how I look.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a sorrow. It's a conundrum. It's really hard. It's a hard thing in my life.
I want to say that one thing I've really noticed, and I want to ask you about it because it's really striking to me and I'm genuinely curious about it, is like you're in this weird world of Hollywood and dresses and having to have the dress for thus and such award show. And obviously I'm super happy for all the success that the book and the movie have had and so forth. But when I see you anguishing over or thinking about what dress should I wear, I'm like, don't buy into that crap.
Well, what I'll say to that is it's a lot easier said than done.
Yeah.
I'll tell you that I have really struggled and had to really talk to myself. Right before Wild premiered, this letter writer, wounded feminist, she talks about looking herself in the mirror and seeing what she sees. And
Yeah.
right before Wild premiered, I went into the bathroom and I looked myself in the mirror and I said, you are not allowed to think anything negative about your body, your weight, or your looks anymore. If you think those things, push them out of